The wind swept low and cold across the endless prairie where the sky stretched out like an ocean of pale blue, the horizon blurring in heat haze though the ground itself was dry, cracked, and scattered with tufts of sagebrush that rattled in the gusts, and into this vast emptiness walked the buffalo, a massive bull whose broad shoulders and thick, dust-matted coat made him appear more like a moving boulder than a living creature, his breath steaming faintly in the chill of dawn, his horns catching the new light as if forged from dull silver, each heavy step pressing into the dirt with a crunch that echoed faintly against the distant canyon walls, and though buffalo were known to move in herds, this one wandered alone, a survivor, scarred across one flank from some forgotten clash with wolves or rival bulls, a being both timeless and monumental, the very embodiment of the wilderness, his eyes dark and steady, reflecting a mixture of ancient instinct and something more elusive. Something like awareness. And as he followed a faint path cut into the earth by generations of hooves, his ears flicked toward a sound that did not belong, a high thin cry carried on the wind, fragile, desperate, the voice of something small and helpless, and though such cries usually belonged to prey creatures that buffalo would ignore, this sound made him stop, his great body going rigid, his head lowering as he listened again, nostrils flaring, and then he moved off the trail, hooves thudding softly, pushing through sagebrush until he reached the dusty edge of an old dirt road where a lone figure lay trembling, a tiny kitten no bigger than a man's boot, its fur patchy and gray-striped, its ribs faint beneath its skin, eyes wide and glassy with fear, mewing as if the very act of calling out might summon the mother it had lost, but instead it had summoned something far more improbable, the towering form of the buffalo who stood over it now, massive head lowered, his warm breath stirring the dust and the kitten's fur. And for a long moment neither creature moved, the kitten frozen, staring upward at a living mountain, and the buffalo staring down with that deep unreadable gaze, until slowly, with the surprising gentleness of an animal that could crush the kitten in a single misplaced step, the buffalo bent his nose to the ground and sniffed, his wet muzzle brushing against the kitten's tiny body, and the kitten squeaked but did not run, too weak, too desperate. And then an astonishing thing happened. The buffalo shifted his stance so that his shadow covered the kitten, shielding it from the rising sun and the biting wind, as if he had chosen to stand guard, and from a distance two men leaning on a battered pickup truck saw this sight, their jaws slack, one fumbling for his phone, whispering that he had never seen anything like it, and the other muttering that the buffalo looked like he was protecting the cat, not threatening it, and they began to record, barely daring to breathe for fear of disturbing the moment, and the camera caught the slow blink of the buffalo, the kitten curling closer to his massive hoof, the way the giant lowered himself slightly to rest one knee against the dirt as if making himself less of a tower and more of a shelter, and the men exchanged nervous laughter, amazed and uncertain, whispering that no one would believe them unless they saw. And so the buffalo and kitten became the focus of the lens, a living myth. Unfolding in real time, the great beast refusing to walk on, refusing to leave the tiny life at his feet, as if bound by some instinct deeper than survival, something almost human in its compassion, and as the hours ticked on, the kitten began to follow the buffalo when he moved, stumbling weakly in the dust, and the buffalo would pause, wait, then lower his massive head to nudge the kitten gently along the path. And again the men filming whispered to each other in disbelief, one saying that the buffalo was leading the cat somewhere, maybe to water, maybe to shelter, while the other insisted this was just coincidence, though his voice trembled because in his heart he knew they were watching something extraordinary, and when the buffalo reached a patch of green grass near a shallow stream, he stopped and began to feed, lowering his great mouth to tear the grass, chewing slow and steady, and when he finished, he bent his muzzle to the kitten again, not to eat, not to harm, but to drop fragments of damp grass before the little creature, nudging it forward as if showing it food, and the kitten, confused but hungry, pawed and chewed clumsily, and once more the men gasped, their cameras shaking as they tried to capture every detail, for here was a creature of 2,000 pounds showing care to one of barely a pound, and the strangeness of it, the beauty of it, made the world feel briefly enchanted, as if the prairie itself had decided to reveal a secret, and when night began to fall, the buffalo did not leave the kitten but lay down beside it, his massive body curled like a wall of warmth, his breaths deep and slow, eyes half-lidded but always alert, and the kitten pressed close to his shaggy flank, mewing softly until sleep overtook it, safe for the first time in days, while the men watching from a distance whispered that they would stay too, keep filming, keep guarding. Because this story was no longer just about an animal and a stray, it was about something larger, something that spoke to the mysteries of kindness that could exist in the most unlikely forms, and though they could not yet know it, the bond between buffalo and kitten was only beginning, a bond that would spread beyond the lonely prairie, beyond their cameras, beyond anything they imagined, as if the buffalo himself understood that sometimes the smallest lives required the greatest strength to protect, and that strength was not only muscle and horn but also heart and soul. Beneath the stars the great buffalo kept watch, while the men whispered and filmed, and the prairie listened in silence to the beginning of a tale that would change all who heard it. The dawn broke slow and pale over the vast sweep of the prairie, a thin mist hanging low where the stream cut its silver line through the dust and sage, and the buffalo rose from his resting place with the deliberate heaviness of a creature forged in another age, his broad back glistening with dew, his breath steaming in the cool air, and nestled at his side the kitten stirred, tiny paws twitching against the earth, mewing faintly as though waking from a dream it feared to lose, and when it opened its eyes the first thing it saw was not the sky or the grass but the enormous shape of its guardian, the giant bull whose shadow had become its shelter, and it rose unsteadily, tottering toward his shaggy flank as though the very presence of the buffalo was food enough to give it strength, and the buffalo, with a slow turn of his great head, lowered his muzzle to brush against the kitten, a gesture so gentle that it seemed impossible such force could be contained in such tenderness, and all the while the two men who had filmed the encounter the night before remained nearby in their truck, eyes red from lack of sleep, coffee cooling in their mugs, unable to drive away because something in their bones told them they were witnessing a story that would not let them go, and as the morning brightened they were joined by another truck, this one driven by a woman from the nearest town, who had seen the shaky footage uploaded online during the night, her curiosity pulling her into the wilderness, and when she stepped out and raised her binoculars she froze, hand tightening on the glass, whispering that the buffalo was still there, the cat still alive, that it was real and not some trick of editing, and soon more came, not many but enough, a rancher with his teenage son, a volunteer from the local animal shelter, a hiker with a camera who claimed he had driven 3 hours after hearing the rumors, and they all stood together on the ridge at a distance, whispering in awe as the buffalo began to move, the kitten trotting weakly behind, stumbling yet determined, and when it fell the buffalo stopped, always stopped, waiting, lowering his muzzle to nudge it back to its feet before carrying on, and the small gathering of humans murmured among themselves that this was no accident, that this was intent, and the rancher shook his head, saying he had lived around buffalo all his life and never seen such behavior, that buffalo were wild, unpredictable, not caretakers of strays. But even as he said it his voice carried more wonder than doubt, because there in front of him the truth unfolded step by step, and the kitten cried, hungry, frail, yet it followed, and the buffalo grazed and then nosed tufts of grass toward it, offering what he had though it was not what the little one needed, and the shelter volunteer whispered that the kitten would not survive long on grass, that it needed milk or meat, and she suggested moving closer, intervening, but the others hesitated, for the buffalo stood watchful, every shift of his massive head a warning that he would not allow clumsy hands to separate them, and so they remained, torn between awe and concern, while cameras clicked and phones streamed, the image already spreading beyond the prairie, drawing comments of disbelief and reverence across the world. Though the buffalo knew nothing of this, he only knew that a small life had fallen into his path and he had chosen not to turn away, and as midday burned down harsh and hot, the kitten grew weaker, lying down often in the shade of the buffalo's belly, and once it did not rise until the buffalo nudged it again and again, rumbling low in his throat, a sound so deep it shook the dust, until finally the kitten lifted its head and staggered to its feet, and the people watching gasped as though they themselves had been revived, and the hiker whispered that the buffalo was not just protecting the kitten but urging it to live, willing it to fight, and the rancher's son said quietly that maybe the buffalo understood more than they thought, maybe it cared in a way no one had believed possible, and his father said nothing, only watched with eyes gone soft, and as the day waned the woman from town brought out a small saucer of milk she had brought just in case, setting it at the edge of the field when the buffalo's back was turned, and when the kitten stumbled across the grass to lap at it the buffalo returned, looming above, and for a tense breath everyone thought he might scatter it, but instead he bent low and sniffed, then let the kitten drink, standing over it as if giving his approval, and the volunteer from the shelter whispered in awe that it was as though the buffalo knew that he had allowed them to help only because it was for the kitten's sake, and the cameras caught it all, every moment, every strange allowance. And by nightfall the prairie ridge had grown into a small camp of witnesses, tents pitched, fires burning low, because none wished to leave, and in the circle of their gaze the buffalo bedded down again, curling massive legs beneath him, the kitten pressed against his chest where his fur was thickest, and the sound of his breathing rumbled like distant thunder, steady and protective, and the people whispered among themselves that they had never seen such a thing and likely never would again, but still the question burned in them, why this buffalo? Why this kitten? What force of instinct or spirit had drawn them together? And as the stars blazed above the prairie the kitten stirred once more, weak but alive, and the buffalo lifted his great head to watch the dark horizon as though expecting something more, some answer carried on the wind, and in that moment every witness felt the weight of mystery settle upon them, the sense that they were part of something far larger than themselves, and they knew they would not leave until the mystery revealed itself, until they learned what the buffalo meant to show them. And the night stretched long and silent save for the crackle of fire and the low, steady heartbeat of the wilderness keeping time with the breaths of a giant and the fragile life he guarded, and thus the story deepened, one step further into wonder and one step closer to a truth that none yet understood. The morning air was thick with anticipation, the horizon awash of gold and amber as the first light spilled across the rolling prairie, and the buffalo stirred, rising from the slight dip where he had lain through the night, his coat glinting with dew, thick and matted in places, streaked with the dust of the endless trail, and the kitten, small and fragile, shifted beside him, paws kneading the dirt as it attempted to stand, wobbling yet determined, and the buffalo lowered his massive head, nudging the tiny creature gently forward, a deep, vibrating rumble emanating from his chest that seemed to say, keep moving, keep trying, and the witnesses who had camped nearby through the night, watching from the ridges and behind sparse sagebrush, whispered among themselves, some speaking in awe, others in disbelief, their cameras capturing every motion, every nuance, knowing that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a display of intelligence and compassion from a creature not commonly associated with tenderness, and the prairie itself seemed to lean in, the wind rustling the sagebrush like the soft murmur of a gathering audience, as the buffalo guided the kitten toward a low-lying ravine where a small patch of water pooled in the shade of overhanging rocks, the stream's surface trembling with reflection and light, and as the kitten lapped cautiously, the buffalo stood nearby, massive hooves planted firmly in the soft soil, eyes scanning the horizon, ears flicking at every whisper of movement, every distant bird call, a sentinel in the open, protecting the smallest of lives with the greatest of care, and as the sun climbed, heating the prairie, a faint sound reached their ears, the soft padding of hooves, and the faint whimper of a creature in distress, and the buffalo's head lifted, nostrils flaring, eyes narrowing slightly as he sniffed the wind, and the witnesses felt a tension that rose in the pit of their stomachs, for they realized that the protective behavior of the buffalo was not solely about the kitten, but something larger, some unseen thread connecting him to the land and the vulnerable life he had claimed responsibility for, and as they approached cautiously, cameras rolling, careful not to startle him, the buffalo shifted, stepping in front of the kitten, horns angled slightly outward, not in aggression but in a shield, a wall of living muscle and instinct, and the kitten, emboldened by the presence of its guardian, padded forward, tail flicking nervously but with trust, and the man from the first day whispered that he had never in his life seen a display of such deliberate protection, that buffalo were strong, unpredictable, dangerous, yet here stood one acting with purpose, with foresight, and he was right, because as the day wore on the group observed more astonishing behavior, the buffalo leading the kitten toward a clump of thorned bushes that sheltered a small hollow, where inside lay a tiny pile of bones, dry and weathered, likely the remains of a lost rabbit or bird, and the buffalo carefully lowered his head, picking small, edible bits of grass and roots, pushing them toward the kitten, teaching, guiding, providing, and the humans whispered that he was feeding it, and someone remarked that the intelligence required for such selective offering, the patience, the gentleness, was staggering, that no predator in its right mind would behave this way, yet here it was, a wild animal showing foresight and care, And as the afternoon waned, clouds forming on the western horizon like the brushstrokes of an unseen artist, the buffalo sensed the shift in the air, the subtle drop in temperature, the scent of impending rain, and he adjusted, moving the kitten under a clump of overhanging sagebrush, pressing himself around it, creating a shelter, a wall against wind and wet, and the witnesses, huddled behind rocks and cameras, exchanged awed glances, knowing that every movement, every decision by the buffalo was purposeful, intentional, and a miracle of instinct married to empathy, and when a sudden gust of wind blew dust across the prairie, the kitten yelped and crouched closer to the buffalo's flank, and he lowered his head again, brushing her fur gently, nudging her toward warmth and safety, his deep eyes reflecting patience, wisdom, and an unspoken promise of protection, and the rancher, observing quietly, muttered that he had been wrong, that buffalo were more than brute force, more than muscle and horns, that they could think, care, and teach, and others nodded, holding their cameras tighter, recording the tableau, knowing it would inspire awe far beyond this ridge, far beyond this day, and as evening approached, the sky a riot of reds and purples, the buffalo stood for a long moment, head high, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling, as if scanning the prairie for threats invisible to the human eye, and then, slowly, deliberately, he turned and began walking along a faint trail that led to a small grove of junipers, the kitten scrambling to keep pace, tripping, falling, and being nudged forward by the giant's soft muzzle, and as they reached the grove, the buffalo lowered himself again, allowing the kitten to climb atop his broad back, an astonishing act that defied all expectations, and the humans whispered among themselves, some silent with reverence, others laughing softly in disbelief, cameras rolling, capturing the kitten perched atop a living fortress, and the buffalo moved with slow, steady grace, each step measured, mindful of the fragile life balanced upon him, his muscles rippling beneath the thick coat, hooves adjusting to the uneven ground, and when a branch scraped against the kitten's fur, he dipped slightly, shielding it from harm, guiding it with patience and precision, and as the night began to fall, stars appearing in the deep blue above, the buffalo lay down in the grove, allowing the kitten to settle upon his broad, warm back, curling around him, trusting implicitly, and the humans whispered that they had witnessed a bond so profound it was almost impossible to describe, that they had never seen anything like it, that this was not just protection, this was partnership, and then came the rain, a soft, steady patter, droplets hitting the buffalo's broad coat, soaking into his fur, running down the ridge of his back, and he did not flinch, did not move, only pressed closer around the kitten, a shield against the wet, against cold, against fear, and the observers watched, hearts pounding, cameras rolling, and in that moment the prairie held its breath, the wind paused, the stars twinkled faintly through the drizzle, and every person present understood that they were witnessing an act of unparalleled compassion, the intelligence of a wild creature extending beyond instinct to deliberate, protective care, and as the night deepened, lightning flickered on the horizon, rumbling low across the distant hills, and the buffalo shifted once, lowering his head to nuzzle the kitten, a deep rumble vibrating through the earth, a promise that they would face the storm together, and in that shared moment, the humans felt something shift within themselves, a recognition that the world was larger, stranger, and more beautiful than they had imagined, that connection, empathy, and courage could exist in forms they had not anticipated, and as the prairie slept under the pounding rain, the buffalo and the kitten huddled together, each breath measured, each eye vigilant, the tiny heartbeat of the kitten echoing in harmony with the deep, resonant pulse of the bull, a rhythm that spoke of survival, trust, and the extraordinary capacity for compassion in the wild, and even as the cameras continued to capture the scene, the witnesses felt their presence was not intrusion but witness to something sacred, a story unfolding that would inspire, challenge, and humble all who would hear of it, and the night stretched on, rain falling, wind sighing through the junipers, the buffalo a massive sentinel, the kitten safe upon his back, and somewhere in the dark expanse of the prairie, the human mind began to understand that here was intelligence, courage, and love bound together in a form that defied expectation, and that the story was only beginning, for the prairie held secrets yet untold, paths yet to follow. And the bond between giant and tiny, predator and prey, protector and protected, would lead them both to challenges unforeseen, and as the first pale light of dawn crept through the clouds, the buffalo lifted his head once more, nostrils flaring, eyes bright, ready to guide, to teach, to protect, and the kitten stirred atop his back, trusting completely, and the humans who had watched silently, recording, filming, trembling with awe, knew that they had been chosen as witnesses to something that would change the way they understood the world forever. The first light of morning spilled over the prairie like molten gold, illuminating the expanse of sagebrush and wild grasses that swayed in the gentle breeze, and the buffalo, massive and steady, stood in the clearing where he had spent the night, the kitten perched safely against his flank, fur still damp from the previous evening's rain, eyes half-closed in comfort and trust, and the humans who had gathered around the edges of the grove stirred quietly, their cameras poised, breaths held. Watching the scene with awe, knowing that the relationship unfolding before them was nothing short of extraordinary, for here was a creature of 2,000 pounds, ancient and wild, exercising deliberate care and protection over a fragile life not its own, and as the wind rustled through the junipers, carrying the scent of damp earth and crushed sage, the buffalo began to move, each step deliberate, powerful yet careful, guiding the kitten through a narrow path that wound between rocks and fallen branches, occasionally lowering his massive head to nudge the tiny creature forward when it faltered, and the humans whispered to each other, voices hushed with reverence, that they had never seen behavior like this in a wild buffalo, that this was not instinct alone, but something greater, something resembling understanding, empathy, and perhaps even foresight, and as the morning progressed, the group grew with cautious curiosity, a wildlife veterinarian arriving from a nearby town, followed by a conservation officer and a small team of volunteers, all drawn by the video recordings that had spread overnight, the news traveling faster than any human could have, and when the veterinarian approached, notebook in hand, the buffalo did not charge or retreat but stood his ground, muscles taut and eyes watchful, a silent declaration that the kitten was under his protection, and the tiny feline, sensing the trust and safety of the bull, pressed closer to his leg, letting the humans come no nearer than the protective shadow of his body, and as the team observed, they began to note the remarkable details of his behavior, how he adjusted his stance to block the wind, how he nudged the kitten toward patches of edible grass, how he seemed to understand when the kitten was cold or frightened, and even how he positioned himself between the small creature and any potential threat, be it predator or human, and the veterinarian whispered to the team, voice trembling with disbelief, that this was unprecedented, that no recorded observation had documented such deliberate protective behavior toward another species in a buffalo, and as the hours passed, the buffalo led the kitten to a shallow pool of water, pausing at the edge to lower his massive muzzle and splash gently, sending droplets toward the kitten, encouraging it to drink and teaching it the rhythm of survival. And the humans could not help but marvel, cameras capturing every moment, the images both humbling and astonishing. And then came a moment that would be etched into memory, a faint rustle in the brush, a rabbit startled into flight, and the buffalo turned his head sharply, muscles coiling, eyes narrowing, hooves planted firmly as a warning, yet he did not strike, did not chase. Instead, he returned his attention to the kitten, the silent message clear that he would defend but not harm, that the priority remained the fragile life he had claimed, and as the day wore on, the kitten began to explore, tentative yet emboldened by the presence of its guardian, pawing at fallen leaves, sniffing at the tufts of grass, and each time it faltered or became too adventurous, the buffalo would nudge or lower his head, a subtle correction, a lesson in caution and safety, and the humans watching whispered that they were witnessing a teacher and a pupil, a protector and the protected, bound by an understanding beyond words, a bond forged by instinct and choice, and soon the conservation officer radioed for additional support, explaining that the situation was delicate, the animal's behavior extraordinary, that intervention could not disrupt the bond, and within the hour, a small team arrived with soft blankets, food, and medical supplies for the kitten, carefully observing from a respectful distance as the buffalo guided the small creature toward a safe hollow beneath a cluster of rocks, lowering himself so the kitten could climb atop his broad back once more, eyes bright and alert, muscles rippling as he carried it with care, and the veterinarian knelt to observe, whispering notes about the health of the kitten and the remarkable composure of the buffalo, commenting that he was demonstrating a level of emotional intelligence rarely attributed to wild megafauna, while the volunteers set up cameras at strategic points to record behavior for study without causing stress. And as the afternoon sun climbed, the buffalo led the kitten toward a grove of trees offering shade, pausing occasionally to graze, the kitten stumbling but always nudged forward, and when a small rock threatened to trip the kitten, he lowered his massive head, softly nudged it aside with his muzzle, and the humans present gasped quietly, realizing that every action was deliberate, teaching, guiding, protecting, and by evening, the prairie seemed to embrace the unusual pair, the wind carrying the soft murmur of their presence, the rustle of grasses, the faint chirp of distant birds. While the buffalo lay down beside the kitten once more, curling around it like a living wall, his deep breath resonating in the quiet air, and the humans whispered that this was sacred, that nothing in their experience had prepared them for the depth of care displayed, and as the night deepened, a faint light flickered from the distant horizon, the moon rising silver and round, and the team recorded the serene tableau. The massive buffalo protecting the tiny kitten, an emblem of strength paired with compassion, resilience paired with care, and the veterinarian spoke softly to the officer, suggesting that the data being gathered could redefine understanding of social and emotional capacities in wild bovines, that this behavior, if studied without interference, could have implications for conservation strategies and public perception alike, and the humans nodded in agreement, humbled and inspired, understanding that the story unfolding before them transcended the prairie, the kitten, and the bull, that it spoke to the potential for intelligence, empathy, and cross-species bonds, and as the night settled over the landscape, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and damp earth, the buffalo and kitten rested together, their breathing in harmony, a living symbol of protection, teaching, and unexpected kindness, and somewhere in the distance, the stars blinked faintly, witnesses of a bond that would inspire research, awareness, and wonder, the humans quietly recording. Knowing that the world would not believe it easily, but that the proof lay here in the actions of a wild creature showing the breadth of heart and intelligence, a reminder that even in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, compassion could thrive, and the bond between buffalo and kitten would guide the coming days, shaping the understanding of those who watched, informing studies, and ultimately, challenging assumptions about the limits of care and cognition in the natural world. And as the night deepened further, the buffalo lifted his massive head, sniffing the air, ears flicking, eyes bright in the moonlight. Dawn broke across the prairie with a soft, pearly light, spilling over the rolling hills, illuminating the sagebrush and the distant cliffs, and the buffalo, immense and unwavering, stirred gently, rising to his feet with the grace and power that seemed almost sculpted into every muscle and sinew, his thick coat dusted with the first light, fur gleaming chestnut and gold, and the kitten, now more confident, scrambled lightly onto his broad back, ears twitching, eyes alert, a tiny embodiment of trust and curiosity, and as the buffalo moved forward, powerful yet careful, the human witnesses who had stayed overnight watched in awe, cameras rolling, documenting every nuanced movement, every interaction, knowing they were seeing a living lesson in empathy, guardianship, and cross-species intelligence, and as he led the kitten toward a small, protected valley nestled between rocky outcrops, the buffalo paused periodically, lowering his head to nudge the kitten, guiding it along safe paths, teaching the young creature the ways of survival in the rugged landscape, and the veterinarian whispered to the conservation officer that this behavior was unprecedented, that the level of patience, protection, and intentional teaching displayed could redefine understanding of social cognition in megafauna, and the officer nodded, noting that their footage could form the basis for a study that might influence policy on wildlife protection, sanctuary design, and human-animal interaction. And as the morning sun rose higher, the buffalo found a small clearing near a spring, water pooling in gentle ripples, and he stepped in carefully, hooves sinking slightly into the soft soil, eyes scanning the horizon for threats, wind carrying scents of distant predators, human observers, and the faint aroma of wildflowers, and then, as if understanding that the place was safe, he lowered his massive head and allowed the kitten to explore the surrounding grasses, pawing cautiously at plants and sniffing at the water's edge, and each time the kitten wavered, hesitated, or risked falling, the buffalo nudged or brushed it gently, a subtle communication of guidance, reassurance, and patience, and the humans whispered among themselves, voices hushed with reverence, noting that the intelligence on display went beyond instinct, that this was deliberate care, protective teaching, a conscious choice to nurture. And as the day wore on, A small team arrived with transport crates, soft blankets, and supplies for the kitten, while others brought medical equipment and food for the buffalo, and the massive creature observed every movement, not with aggression, but with measured watchfulness, eyes alert, muscles coiled, yet ever mindful of the kitten's safety, and when the veterinarian approached with a blanket, the buffalo shifted slightly, allowing the kitten to climb onto the soft fabric for comfort. A gentle cooperation that astonished every observer, cameras capturing each moment, the footage destined to inspire awe, research, and policy consideration, and as the afternoon heat rose, the buffalo guided the kitten toward a shaded hollow beneath a rocky ledge, the human team carefully following, respecting the distance he maintained, and at that moment, a young volunteer remarked softly that it seemed as though he was showing them the rules of the world, how to move safely, how to protect, how to survive, and all the humans nodded, aware that the lessons being witnessed were profound, transformative, and deeply humbling, and as evening approached, the prairie bathed in golden light, the buffalo led the kitten to a gentle slope overlooking a small grove, pausing to graze while ensuring the kitten remained safe, and in that quiet moment, the conservation officer suggested that the bull be considered for relocation to a protected preserve, one designed for animals demonstrating advanced social intelligence, and the veterinarian agreed, noting that the observations could be critical in shaping future approaches to megafauna conservation, sanctuary design, and understanding of cross-species bonding, and as twilight descended, the buffalo lay down in the grove, allowing the kitten to rest against him, their breaths synchronized, a living emblem of protection, trust, and enduring connection, and in the fading light, the human team quietly set up a temporary enclosure nearby. Soft fences and blankets, food and water, all placed with meticulous care to ensure minimal stress, and the buffalo observed, massive head lifted, eyes bright, ears flicking at every movement, yet never leaving the kitten exposed or vulnerable, and over the next hours, the team marveled at his patience, noticing the deliberate positioning of his body, the subtle nudges and gestures guiding the kitten, ensuring its comfort, safety, and learning, and the footage captured was already drawing attention online. Scientists and wildlife enthusiasts sharing the story, debating implications, and recognizing that here was a living example of intelligence, emotional depth, and interspecies care that transcended prior understanding, and as the night settled over the prairie, stars blinking faintly in the clear sky, the buffalo rose once more, moving to position the kitten on his broad back for warmth and security, a gesture both protective and instructive, and the humans whispered to each other, hearts full, recognizing that this was not a spectacle, but a living narrative of resilience, compassion, and understanding, and as the moon rose, silver and luminous, the buffalo stood watch over the valley, scanning the horizon, ears swiveling, muscles coiled, while the kitten slept peacefully, trusting completely, and the team quietly recorded, knowing that the story was unfolding into something far greater than any could have imagined, inspiring thoughts of sanctuary design, wildlife education, conservation programs, and public engagement, and as the wind carried the scent of sage and damp earth, the veterinarian suggested that this buffalo's behavior could be studied as a model for social learning, interspecies interaction, and protection behaviors, potentially influencing policy, and the officer nodded, envisioning grants, research programs, and public awareness campaigns, and the volunteer remarked that witnessing this connection, so pure and deliberate, altered their perception of the natural world, of animals' capacity for empathy, care, and foresight, and as night deepened, the buffalo lay down beside the kitten once more, pressing around the small body in a protective embrace, eyes scanning the stars, nostrils flaring softly, and in that quiet, expansive moment, the humans understood that what they had witnessed was a living testament to the potential for compassion and intelligence in the wild, that the prairie itself seemed to hold its breath in recognition, and the story, once recorded, would ripple far beyond the hills, inspiring research, policy, education, and perhaps even shifting the way society perceives the emotional capacities of animals, and as the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, the buffalo lifted his massive head, eyes bright and alert, nostrils flaring, muscles rippling beneath his thick coat, and the kitten stirred atop his back, tail flicking, ears twitching, and together, they moved forward into a new day, a living symbol of protection, resilience, and the transformative power of Interspecies bonds, the human team following at a respectful distance, knowing that the story of this buffalo and the kitten would inspire awe, research, and policy for generations to come, a story of courage, intelligence, and compassion written across the wide, windswept plains, and the prairie held its breath in witness to the extraordinary. As cameras rolled, notes were taken, and every observer recognized the privilege of being part of something unprecedented, an enduring testament to the depth of heart and mind that could exist in the natural world. And in that unfolding moment, the buffalo moved steadily, carefully, guiding the kitten toward safety, comfort, and understanding, every step a lesson, every glance a message, and the humans, humbled and inspired, recorded, studied, and learned, aware that the world had changed subtly, irrevocably, through the extraordinary acts of one wild guardian and the fragile life it protected. The prairie stretched endlessly beneath a vast expanse of sky, the wind whispering through the tall grasses and carrying the earthy scent of sage and wildflowers, and in the heart of this rugged landscape, the buffalo moved with the same deliberate grace and majesty that had captured the awe of so many, muscles rippling beneath a thick chestnut coat, horns glinting in the morning sun, nostrils flaring gently as he exhaled, and the kitten, now thriving and confident, trotted alongside him, tail high, eyes bright and alert, a living testament to the bond forged through patience, protection, and unwavering care. And as they navigated the winding paths of their expansive sanctuary, a team of wildlife experts, conservationists, and volunteers followed at a careful distance, notebooks in hand, cameras discreetly recording every nuanced interaction, documenting what had become an unprecedented case study in interspecies bonding, social intelligence, and protective behavior. And the buffalo, fully aware of their presence yet unperturbed, guided the kitten toward shaded groves, small pools of clear water, and safe feeding grounds, occasionally lowering his massive head to encourage the kitten forward, demonstrating a level of guidance, teaching, and deliberate protection that left every observer in profound awe. And over the following days, researchers began to analyze the extensive footage, noting subtle patterns in the buffalo's behavior, the precise positioning of his body to shield the kitten from wind or sun, the gentle nudges to correct missteps, the strategic pauses to allow the kitten to explore and learn, and even the soft vocalizations that seemed to communicate reassurance and guidance. And as these observations accumulated, the scientific community took notice, with articles in journals highlighting the implications for understanding cognition, empathy, and cross-species relationships in large mammals, and policymakers began to consider how such insights could inform sanctuary management, wildlife protection legislation, and educational programs designed to foster appreciation for the intelligence and emotional depth of animals. And the public, captivated by viral images and videos, responded with a wave of support, donations to the sanctuary pouring in, letters from children inspired to learn about conservation arriving daily, and social media campaigns spreading awareness of the buffalo's extraordinary guardianship. And in this climate of attention, the buffalo, now affectionately named Guardian by the sanctuary staff, continued his daily routines with quiet dignity, leading the kitten to grazing areas, teaching it how to identify safe water sources, and modeling behaviors that would prepare the young feline for a life in the natural world. And the kitten, growing in strength and confidence, followed closely, ears swiveling, tail flicking, eyes scanning the environment, learning lessons that transcended instinct, absorbing the deliberate wisdom imparted by its massive companion. And every evening, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of crimson and gold, the buffalo would settle into the soft grasses, curling around the kitten in a protective embrace, breathing slowly, steadily, a living shield against the vast wilderness. And the sanctuary staff, observers of this daily ritual, could not help but marvel at the depth of trust and attachment that had developed, noting that the relationship exemplified a level of mutual understanding and emotional connection previously thought to be rare or impossible across species. And as the weeks turned into months, the impact of Guardian's actions became increasingly evident. The kitten thrived under his guidance, displaying confidence, agility, and curiosity, while researchers published findings that challenged conventional assumptions about megafauna cognition, offering compelling evidence that wild animals could demonstrate intentional care, empathy, and teaching behaviors. and conservation organizations leveraged the story to advocate for expanded protections for buffalo and other keystone species, emphasizing the critical role such creatures played in maintaining ecological balance. The public, inspired by the narrative, visited the sanctuary in increasing numbers, eager to witness firsthand the extraordinary bond, contributing to funding, educational outreach, and broader awareness of wildlife preservation. And journalists, photographers, and filmmakers captured the story with sensitivity and reverence, highlighting not only the drama and novelty of the buffalo's protective behavior but also the profound lessons it offered about compassion, trust, and the interconnectedness of life. And amidst this growing recognition, Guardian continued to embody the ideals of resilience and guardianship, moving with the same deliberate care, always attentive to the kitten's needs, shielding it from potential threats, modeling survival strategies, and offering comfort and reassurance. And the kitten, now strong and adventurous, would often venture a few steps ahead or around him, yet always returned, brushing against Guardian's flank, a small gesture of acknowledgement, trust, and affection. And the sanctuary staff documented these behaviors meticulously, noting that the patterns suggested a sophisticated level of understanding, problem-solving, and emotional awareness, with potential implications for conservation strategy, animal welfare policy, and educational programming. And over time, the story of Guardian and the kitten reached a global audience, inspiring campaigns emphasizing empathy, coexistence, and the importance of preserving natural habitats, while schools integrated the narrative into curricula focused on environmental stewardship, compassion, and interspecies relationships. And policymakers cited the observations as a catalyst for expanded protection of migratory corridors, improved sanctuary designs, and funding for cognitive and behavioral research in wild megafauna. And within the sanctuary, daily life took on a rhythm informed by the needs and habits of the extraordinary pair, Guardian leading the way through grassy meadows and shaded hollows, pausing to graze or allow the kitten to explore, teaching, guiding, protecting, and the kitten responding with growing autonomy, confidence, and curiosity, learning not just survival skills but also lessons in trust, patience, and mutual respect. And as seasons changed, Guardian's coat thickened for winter, muscles growing even more defined, the kitten's fur sleek and resilient, and the sanctuary became a focal point for studies in cross-species care, emotional intelligence in wildlife, and conservation education, with students, researchers, and volunteers coming from near and far to observe, learn, and participate in hands-on preservation and monitoring efforts. And throughout this, Guardian remained steady, calm, and deliberate, never wavering in his protective duties, always alert to the kitten's safety. And the bond between them became a symbol of hope, a living demonstration that intelligence, empathy, and care could transcend species boundaries, inspiring humans to reflect on their own relationships with the natural world, to recognize the sentience and emotional complexity of animals, and to advocate for a more compassionate, informed approach to conservation. And in quiet moments, when the sun cast long shadows across the prairie, Guardian would lie down beside the kitten, eyes half closed in calm, nostrils flaring gently, tail sweeping over the grasses, a living emblem of endurance, care, and wisdom, while the kitten nestled against him, tail flicking, ears attentive, eyes shining with trust. And observers would whisper in reverence, knowing they were witnessing not just the survival of two lives but the creation of a legacy, one that would ripple through science, policy, education, and public consciousness. And as the sun set in a blaze of amber and rose, painting the sky with streaks of light, Guardian rose, muscles rippling, horns catching the last rays, and with the kitten following close, he moved forward into the dusk, each step deliberate, protective, instructive, a living testament to the power of care and connection. And the sanctuary, the observers, and the world beyond would forever remember the lessons of this prairie, where a buffalo and a tiny kitten had rewritten expectations, challenged assumptions, and inspired generations to come, demonstrating that even in the wild, empathy, trust, and guidance could flourish, and that the actions of one conscious, compassionate creature could catalyze understanding, policy, research, and hearts across the globe. And as night fell, stars emerging in the vast, unbroken sky, Guardian stood watch over the valley, nostrils flaring, ears twitching, muscles coiled yet calm, the kitten curled safely at his side. And in that moment, A hush fell across the prairie, as though the land itself recognized the extraordinary bond, a silent witness to the enduring power of compassion, resilience, and intelligence, and the humans watching, recording, and studying could only marvel, knowing that the legacy of Guardian would echo far beyond this remote wilderness, inspiring care, conservation, and reverence for generations, leaving a message for all who would listen, that compassion knows no species, that trust can be built across vast differences, and that the smallest acts of guardianship can resonate with profound impact, transforming lives, policies, and perceptions alike. And as the wind carried the scent of sage and pine across the rolling hills, the buffalo and kitten moved together beneath the moonlit sky, guardians and learners, protectors and inspired, embodying a story that would forever remind humanity that in the heart of the wild, extraordinary bonds can form, resilience can flourish, and the courage to care can change the world.